Asterisk, I've lived 55 years on this earth, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that betrayal never comes from strangers. It comes from the people you trusted most. It sneaks in through the smiles of those you love, hides in the promises you thought were unbreakable, and one day it explodes in your face like a landmine you never saw coming. My name is Eleanor Cole. Though most people just call me Ellie, I'm the older sister, the steady one, the woman who has always carried more weight than she probably should. I've never been rich, but I've always been proud of the life I built. I worked, I sacrificed, I survived, and through it all, I stood by my family. My younger brother, Andrew, we call him Drew, has been at the center of that family since the day he was born. I was 10 when he came into this world. I remember the way he looked up at me from his crib, those wide eyes full of trust. Maybe that's why I always felt more like a second mother than a sister. I looked out for him, shielded him, sometimes even smothered him. And for decades, I thought that bond would be the one thing in my life that never broke. But bonds, like glass, don't always shatter when you expect them to. They crack slowly, quietly, until one day you're holding nothing but sharp edges that cut you to the bone. Drew grew into a man who was kind to a fault. He had my father's generosity, my mother's soft heart. He became a businessman, smart enough to grow our small family estate into something respectable. Not extravagant, but comfortable. Then, in his late 40s, he married Selena Selena. Even saying her name now leaves a taste like metal on my tongue. The first time I met her, I wanted to like her. She was radiant, the kind of woman who seemed to pull all the air out of a room without even trying. Tall, raven-haired, with a voice that could melt ice, and eyes that could just as easily freeze you in place. She had this way of leaning in when she spoke, making you feel like you were the only person who mattered. Drew fell hard and fast. I can't blame him. Most men would have. But I've learned that charisma can be a mask. And beauty can be a weapon. I remember the first dinner we had together after their wedding. Selena sat across from me at Drew's long oak table, her hands draped over his like silk, her smile delicate but her eyes calculating. She laughed at all his stories, touching his arm just enough to remind him she was there. And all the while, she studied me, the sister, the gatekeeper. I felt it. Women know when they're being measured, and I knew she was weighing me in her scales. At the time, I brushed it aside. I told myself I was being overprotective, that no woman would ever feel good enough for my brother. But looking back now, I realized that moment was the start of a game I didn't even know I was playing. Life went on. For a while, Drew was happier than I'd ever seen him. Selena had this way of making him feel like a king. She praised him, built him up, made him believe he was the center of her world. And maybe he was, for as long as it served her. Because love, real love, is about building together. But for Selena, it was about control. I noticed small things at first. Drew stopped calling me as often. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, quick to defend her even when no one was attacking. At family gatherings, Selena steered every conversation back to herself, but with a sugar-coated charm that made it hard to call her out. She was weaving a web, and my brother was the fly, blissfully unaware. One night, after a holiday dinner, Drew hugged me at the door. His embrace was quick, almost hurried, and his eyes darted back to where Selena waited in the car. "You know I love you, right?" He said. "Of course I do," I told him. But the truth was, a knot had already started forming in my stomach. Still, I never imagined how far it would go. The storm hit 2 years later. It was a gray morning in early spring when Drew called me, his voice shaking. "Ellie," he said, "she's gone." At first I thought he meant she'd left him, packed her bags, run off with someone else. And part of me almost felt relief, like maybe he could finally be free. But then he said the words that made my blood run cold. The money. The account's $10 million. It's all gone. And so is she. 10 million. The weight of it nearly knocked the breath out of me. That money wasn't just numbers in a bank account. It was decades of work, of sacrifices, of my parents' legacy, and the security of our future. It was everything. I rushed to his house, my heart pounding the whole way. When I arrived, Drew looked like a ghost. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he showed me the empty accounts on his computer screen. Selena's clothes were gone. Her jewelry box empty. She hadn't just left, she'd vanished, erasing herself with surgical precision. "I don't understand," he kept saying. "She loved me. She wouldn't, but she would." And she had. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into whatever hole she'd crawled into and drag her out by her hair. But instead, I did what I've always done. I took control. I called the bank, the police. I started making lists, gathering documents, forcing myself to stay calm while my brother fell apart beside me that night. When the house was finally quiet, I sat in Drew's study, staring at the flickering light of a desk lamp. The betrayal settled over me like a shroud. It wasn't just the money. It was the violation, the cruelty, the way she'd looked me in the eye all those times, smiling like we were family while she plotted this. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. She thought she had one. She thought she could strip us bare and disappear into the night. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Selena's face, that perfect mask of innocence she wore so well. The way she'd laugh lightly at my brother's jokes, as if he were the most brilliant man alive. The way she'd squeeze his hand at parties, always making sure everyone knew he belonged to her. I replayed it all, and in every memory. I saw it now for what it was. Performance. Calculation by morning. Drew was a shell of himself. He sat in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee untouched in front of him, staring blankly at the tiled floor. His hair, once neatly combed, stuck out in disheveled tufts. His shoulders slumped as if he carried the weight of the entire world on his back. "She'll come back," he whispered, almost to himself. I wanted to shake him, to scream that she wasn't coming back, not out of love, not with apologies. But my brother was too fragile. His heart cracked wide open. I swallowed my anger and sat beside him. "No, Drew," I said softly, choosing my words carefully. "She won't. Not for the reasons you want. But one day she might show her face again. And when she does, we'll be ready." He looked at me with those hollow eyes, searching for hope where there was none. I reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it hard. I didn't have answers yet, but I had resolve. The police came that afternoon. A detective named Ramirez Sharp, middle-aged, with the kind of eyes that missed nothing. He asked questions, flipping through his notepad, probing into every detail of their marriage, their finances, their friends. Drew stammered through his answers. But I could tell Ramirez was already forming a picture. "She didn't just leave," Ramirez said finally, tapping his pen against the page. "She planned this. Weeks, maybe months. The clean sweep of the accounts, the way she vanished without a trace. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated." I felt a flicker of bitter satisfaction. At least someone else could see it too. But Drew broke down right there in front of us, his face buried in his hands. "She loved me," he sobbed. "I know she did. I don't understand how she could." I put my arm around him, though inside I was boiling. Love. Love doesn't hollow out a man and leave him penniless. Love doesn't gut a family's legacy like a thief in the night. After the detectives left, I wandered through the house. Every corner still smelled of her perfume. A scarf draped over a chair, a half-burned candle on the windowsill. Ghosts of her lingered everywhere, taunting us. I ended up in her closet, staring at the rows of empty hangers. All her designer dresses gone. All her jewelry cases gone. But one thing had been left behind. A single pair of red heels shoved in the corner. It was almost too perfect, like she wanted me to see them. To know she'd chosen what to take and what to leave, it felt like a message that night. I sat in my own house with a glass of wine in hand, staring at the flickering flame of a candle. The more I thought about it, the more I became certain of one thing. She wasn't finished. Selena wasn't the type to disappear quietly into another life. Women like her thrived on control, on winning. She would resurface when it suited her, when she thought she could take more. And when she did, I had to be ready. Over the next week, I started digging. I went through every old email, every receipt Drew could find, every scrap of paper she'd left behind. Patterns emerged. Donations to charities that didn't exist. Luxury purchases charged to shell accounts. A phone bill with odd numbers repeated, some of them international. Selena hadn't just stolen from us, she'd been living a double life right under our noses. The more I uncovered, the colder I became inside. My anger wasn't wild and hot anymore. It was sharp, precise, like the edge of a blade. Drew, meanwhile, was unraveling. He stopped going to work, stopped eating. He'd sit for hours staring at his phone, hoping it would light up with her name. It broke my heart to watch him like that, but I also couldn't stand his weakness. He was clinging to the ghost of a woman who had gutted him. One night, after I'd practically forced him to eat, I snapped. "Drew, listen to me," I said, my voice low but firm. "She played you. She played all of us. You can't sit here waiting for her to come home like some lost puppy. She's not coming back because she loves you. If she comes back, it'll be because she wants more. And if you don't toughen up, she'll destroy what little you have left." His eyes filled with tears, but behind them, I saw a flicker, a tiny spark of anger. Good anger meant he wasn't completely broken. A few days later, the first sign arrived that I'd been right all along. It came in the form of an envelope, slipped under Drew's front door in the dead of night. No return address, no stamps. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. "Don't try to find me. You'll regret it if you do. The money is mine now. She who wins deserves the prize." No signature, but it didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Elegant, looping letters. Like a queen signing a decree. Selena, the rage that boiled up in me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. She wasn't gone. She wasn't hiding. She was taunting us. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. She thought she had one. She thought she'd broken us. But I was no victim. I was no fool. I whispered into the darkness, as if she could hear me through the miles that separated us. "You may have fooled my brother, Selena. You may have stolen his love, his money, his trust. But you'll never see me coming. You've built this game, but I'll be the one to finish it." And for the first time since she disappeared, I smiled, because the storm had arrived. But I was no longer afraid of it. I was learning how to wield it. The days after that envelope arrived were some of the longest of my life. Every time I walked up to Drew's porch, my heart would tighten, wondering if I'd find another message waiting for us. A part of me almost wished for it, because silence was worse. Silence meant she could be anywhere, doing anything, plotting her next move. Drew was unraveling faster than I could keep up. He'd lost weight, his cheeks hollowed out, his skin pale. He wasn't shaving, he wasn't eating, was barely sleeping. His phone was glued to his hand as if Selena might suddenly call, apologizing, telling him it had all been some mistake. But deep down, I think he knew the truth. And that was killing him more than anything else. I'd sit across from him at the kitchen table trying to coax a few bites of food into him, and I'd see it in his eyes, that hollow, desperate kind of heartbreak you can't pull someone out of. I'd seen it once before, years ago, when our father had died. But this time was worse. It's because the wound had been carved open by the very person he'd trusted most. "Ellie," he said one evening, his voice cracked and weak. "Maybe she just panicked. Maybe she took the money, but she realized it was wrong and come back. She loved me. I know she did." I closed my eyes, biting back the anger that wanted to erupt. He wasn't ready to hear the truth in full yet. But I couldn't let him drown in false hope either. "Drew," I said gently, "love doesn't do what she did. Didn't panic. She planned this, every detail. She's not coming back because she regrets it. If she comes back, it'll be for one reason only, to take more." He looked at me like a man caught between believing me and clinging to his delusion. And I understood. Letting go of her meant letting go of the dream he'd built, and for him, That was like tearing out a piece of his soul. But for me, letting go of her wasn't an option. Not when she was still out there circling us like a vulture. I started digging deeper. I went through Drew's old files, their joint accounts, her social media pages. Most of her online presence had vanished, scrubbed clean, but here and there I found traces. Pictures with friends who seemed too polished, too rehearsed. Old travelogues with destinations that didn't match the receipts I uncovered. And always, there was money moving not just from Drew's estate, but through side channels I couldn't fully trace. I printed everything, spread it out across my living room floor like pieces of a puzzle. Drew thought I was obsessed, but I knew what I was doing. Selena had woven a web, and webs can be untangled if you're patient enough. Late one night, as I was staring at the papers, I caught myself whispering, "Where are you, Selena? Your next move." And almost as if she'd heard me, another message arrived 2 days later. This time, it wasn't left at Drew's house. It was mailed directly to me. No return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope. Inside was a photograph. It was of Selena. She was standing on a balcony somewhere tropical, sunlight hitting her skin, a cocktail glass raised in her hand. Her smile was wide, triumphant. And on the back of the photo, in her looping handwriting, were 5 words. "Did you really think I lost?" My hands shook as I stared at it. She wasn't just gloating, she was baiting me. I poured myself a drink that night and sat alone in the dark, the photo burning in my hand. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she could take everything from us and then rub it in my face, like some cruel joke. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. Because while Drew crumbled, I was sharpening. I was learning. I was becoming the very thing she didn't expect. A player in her game. Detective Ramirez came by a few days later to update us. The investigation was moving slowly, too slowly for me. The money trail had gone cold and without evidence. There wasn't much they could pin on her. "She's smart," Ramirez admitted, leaning back in his chair. "Too smart. She covered her tracks well. Offshore accounts, fake IDs, maybe even accomplices. Women like her don't work alone." I studied his face. "But you believe she'll come back, don't you?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "People like her always do. They crave the spotlight. They can't resist showing off." Exactly. That was the crack in her armor. I decided then and there that I wouldn't just wait for the police to solve this. I'd find my own way. One evening, I sat with Drew, who was nursing his 3rd whiskey of the night. "Listen to me," I told him, my voice firm. "You can sit here and drink yourself into oblivion, or you can stand up and fight. Which is it going to be?" He stared at me, his eyes bloodshot. "What if I can't fight, Ellie? What if I don't have it in me?" "Then I'll fight for you," I snapped. "But you'd better not stand in my way." I meant it. The following week, I began reaching out to contacts of my own, old colleagues, people I'd trusted over the years. A friend in banking who could discreetly track transactions. A lawyer who knew how to smell out fraudulent contracts. Piece by piece, I built a quiet team, never telling Drew the full extent of it, and slowly. The outlines of Selena's trail began to appear. She had moved money into an offshore account under the name of a shell company. From there, it disappeared. Again into another account, tied to a man I didn't recognize, Jason Hale. Ramirez confirmed later that Hale had a reputation. Slick businessman who thrived in gray areas of the law. That was her accomplice. Her anchor, the discovery, made my blood run cold, but it also gave me clarity. She wasn't alone in this. She had help, protection. And that made her even more dangerous. But it also made her more vulnerable. Because alliances built on greed always crack. Late one night, as I stared at that photograph again, I felt a shift inside me. For weeks I'd been furious, hurt, raw. But now I was something else. Calm, focused. I whispered aloud, though the room was empty. "You wanted a war, Selena. Now you've got one." And for the first time since she disappeared, I felt in control again. The weeks that followed were a blur of research, phone calls, and quiet planning. I spent hours going through every digital footprint Selena had left, trying to see patterns that might give me an edge. Drew barely left the couch, nursing his despair like it was a shield against reality. I couldn't let him stay there. I had to pull him back from the edge, even if he resisted. One evening, while Drew was asleep, I pored over the information I'd gathered. Her offshore accounts were tangled and hidden behind layers of shell companies, but there were threads I could follow. Little details she'd missed, dates that didn't match receipts, a pattern in the way she contacted Jason Hale. She was meticulous, but she wasn't infallible. People like her leave breadcrumbs without realizing it. I made a plan. It had to be subtle, patient, and deliberate. I wasn't just going to track her down. I was going to make her think she was still untouchable until it was too late. First, I had to lure her into a false sense of security. The kind of trap you set for someone who believes they are always 3 steps ahead. Meanwhile, Drew started noticing small things. I'd leave a file open on the kitchen table, a printout of a bank statement with an account that didn't exist, and he'd squint at it, brow furrowed. "Ellie, why is this here?" he asked, voice weak but curious. "It's nothing," I said, but he didn't press. He trusted me in a way he couldn't trust anyone else right now. And that gave me power. Not over him, but over the situation. I could move pieces without him even realizing it. I contacted Ramirez again, carefully, without giving away my intentions. I needed him to keep pressure on Selena without letting her know I was actively building my own counter. Law enforcement could only do so much. A woman like Selena was always 2 steps ahead unless you had insider knowledge, which I was slowly acquiring every night. I'd sit with a map of the country, tracing the possible paths Selena could have taken. The photos she sent taunted me, a sunlit paradise that seemed too perfect to be real. But it gave me something invaluable, a hint at her lifestyle. Her vanity, her desire to show off her victory. I knew she would slip up. She always does. One day I received a call from a friend who worked in banking compliance. He had noticed a suspicious wire transfer linked to Selena, a movement of funds large enough to raise eyebrows if properly traced. My heart leaped, but I stayed calm. I asked him to monitor it discreetly to alert me if anything else surfaced. Then came the psychological games. Selena started escalating them through messages. Texts to Drew, emails to me, even calls that she masked as accidental. Each one was designed to sow fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt. "I'm always watching." One message read. Another simply said, "You can't protect him forever." I burned them immediately, documenting every single one, knowing they could be used later to show intent. But the messages also served another purpose. They confirmed she was close, nearby, confident, arrogant. And that arrogance would be her undoing. I began to plant my own small hints, tiny digital traces meant to draw her out. A photograph of a fake bank receipt, a mention of a non-existent meeting with potential investors. Little bait, just enough to let her think she could manipulate us further. Drew began to respond to me again, slowly returning to life, though cautiously. He'd follow me into my office, watching me work, sometimes offering an observation or question. His eyes no longer looked hollow, but wary. He was coming back to himself, and I could feel my own strength growing in tandem with his recovery. One evening, as I pored over the latest information, a thought struck me. Selena had one weakness I hadn't fully exploited, her need for recognition. She thrived on attention, on proving that she was smarter than everyone else. If I could manipulate that, I could control her actions indirectly. I started to create false leads, carefully constructing scenarios that suggested Drew and I were close to exposing her. I let small hints slip into the media she consumed. Knowing she monitored certain financial blogs and news outlets for mentions of her activities, every little nudge was a pressure point. Then came the breakthrough. A bank in a neighboring state contacted my friend about an unusual transaction. It was her, or rather Jason Hale's account, trying to funnel large sums through an under-the-radar method. I had my proof, and I had her trace. The trap had to be perfect. Too early, and she'd suspect. Too late, and she might escape again. I coordinated with Ramirez and my banking friend to set up surveillance and freeze key accounts simultaneously. I couldn't let her suspect what was happening until the net was already closing. Meanwhile, Selena was playing her final games. She sent Drew another message filled with lies and half-truths, suggesting she had hidden a portion of the money elsewhere, daring him to follow. Drew, surprisingly, didn't respond this time. He'd learned caution from his ordeal and from me. The tension in our home was palpable. Every sound outside, every unfamiliar car set me on edge. But I felt ready. Months of preparation, observation, and manipulation had led to this point. I had all the pieces, and I knew exactly when to strike. One rainy night, as I waited in the car near the bank branch she frequented, I saw her, Selena, flawless in her designer coat, phone in hand, utterly confident. She smiled at something on her screen, completely unaware that I had tracked her movements and set the trap. I signaled Ramirez and our team quietly. They were stationed discreetly, ready to move when the final step was triggered. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the thrill of justice. This was the moment where months of planning, of living in the shadows, would pay off. Selena walked into the bank, asking questions, transferring funds, oblivious to the hidden eyes, monitoring every move. My phone buzzed, Ramirez confirming that the freeze orders were in place. The accounts she thought were safe were locked. Every exit strategy she might have had was cut off. I could almost hear her mind spinning, though she didn't know I was listening. The arrogance, the confidence, the belief that she could manipulate us all. It was crumbling in real time. When she left the bank and saw the police waiting outside, Ramirez stepping forward and notices handed directly to her. The expression on her face was priceless. Shock, fear, and disbelief all tangled together. I stepped out of the car quietly, not wanting her to see me immediately. Let her absorb the full impact. This was the moment she realized that control had shifted entirely. Drew arrived moments later, standing behind me, watching the woman who had shattered his world being led away. His eyes met mine, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." I corrected him gently. But more importantly, we showed her she was never untouchable. For the first time in months, the weight on our shoulders lifted. Selena had gambled and she had lost. Her web of manipulation, her carefully constructed empire of deceit, all fell apart because she underestimated the power of preparation, patience, and the refusal to be intimidated. That night, we sat together in the quiet of our living room, watching the rain streak the windows, and I realized something profound. Life hadn't just given me a test, it had sharpened me. It had taught me to anticipate, to strategize, and to fight with both patience and precision. And it had reminded me that even in the darkest times, wisdom and courage could prevail. Drew looked at me, gratitude in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," I said softly. "Just promise me one thing. Never let anyone else have that kind of power over you again." He nodded, and I knew he meant it. And as I finally let myself breathe, I knew the story wasn't over. There would always be shadows, always tests. But now, armed with the lessons of betrayal, patience, and the art of strategy, we were ready for whatever came next. Selena's reign of manipulation was over. Our lives, though forever changed, were ours to reclaim. And as the rain fell outside, washing the streets clean, I felt a rare sense of clarity and power. We had survived. We had outsmarted her. And more importantly, we had learned that even the most cunning adversaries could be unmasked with patience, intelligence, and a refusal to surrender. The morning after Selena's arrest, the house felt unusually quiet. No urgent texts, no whispered threats, no late-night calls from her accomplices. It was a strange, almost surreal calm that made me uneasy. I had spent months anticipating the chaos after her capture, and yet here we were, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. Drew moved slowly, still carrying the weight of disbelief on his shoulders. He had been shaken to his core, and while the immediate threat was gone, the psychological remnants of fear and betrayal lingered like shadows. I could see them in his eyes, the uncertainty, the wariness, the quiet caution that now tempered his every move. We spent that day going through what she had done, meticulously documenting her manipulations, her hidden accounts, and the evidence she had left behind. Every digital footprint she had tried to erase, every lie she had told became a tool in our hands. There was satisfaction in seeing the web she had spun laid bare, but also a sharp sting in realizing how close we had come to losing everything. I reminded Drew, gently but firmly, that the power she had wielded was always an illusion, sustained by fear and secrecy. Once the fear was removed, once the truth was exposed, her influence evaporated. It was a lesson not just for him, but for both of us. Control is a fragile thing, easily broken by patience, vigilance, and courage. The media frenzy began slowly, whispers of the scandal leaking into financial blogs and news outlets. It was subtle at first, the kind of reporting that drew attention but didn't yet name names. I watched carefully, guiding Drew to respond cautiously, to keep his distance from public speculation. Selena's need for attention would only backfire as the evidence mounted against her. That evening, Drew finally asked the question I had been expecting, the one that had haunted him in private moments. "Ellie, why did you do it all? Why go to such lengths?" I paused, considering my words carefully. Because, Drew, no one else would. And because sometimes the best way to protect someone you love is to fight from the shadows. She underestimated patience and intelligence to things she had no respect for. And that was her undoing. It wasn't just a victory. It was a turning point. For months, Drew had been passive, frozen by shock and betrayal. But now, seeing the consequences of manipulation, seeing the truth exposed, I could see him beginning to reclaim himself. His posture straightened, his gaze sharpened, and a quiet determination replaced the hollow despair. We spent the next few days attending to the fallout, contacting banks, securing remaining assets, and collaborating with investigators to ensure Selena's accomplices were identified. It was tedious, exhausting work, but necessary. Every document, every statement, every account verified was a step toward reclaiming our lives. One evening, as I sat reviewing the latest reports, Drew came up beside me, handing me a cup of tea. "You know," he said softly, "I never realized how much of myself I had left in her hands. Not just my money, but everything I thought I understood about people." I smiled faintly, understanding completely. "That's the nature of betrayal," I said. "It teaches you who you can trust, but more importantly, it teaches you what you're capable of when you refuse to be broken." As the days passed, Drew began to regain his confidence. He returned to work cautiously at first, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He reached out to friends he had neglected, to colleagues he had distanced himself from during Selena's manipulations. Rebuilding trust took time, but the cracks left by her betrayal gradually healed. I, too, found a strange sense of liberation. The months of stress, vigilance, and strategic planning had honed my instincts, sharpened my judgment, and deepened my understanding of human nature. Betrayal had been a teacher, and though the lessons were harsh, it had made me stronger. Then came the final piece, Selena's trial. Watching her in court, arrogant and defiant, I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Every lie she had told, every manipulation she had attempted, was laid bare for all to see. The legal system moved slowly, methodically. But it was unstoppable once the evidence was irrefutable. During the proceedings, Drew and I maintained a careful distance, letting the truth speak for itself. Each testimony, each document, each piece of forensic evidence contributed to the collapse of her carefully constructed narrative. She had believed she could escape accountability, that her charm and cunning would shield her, but in the end, justice was inevitable. Outside the courtroom, Drew turned to me, his expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said again, more earnestly than before. "You don't have to," I replied. "Just remember this. Never let anyone else have that kind of control over your life. And trust your instincts, they're sharper than you think. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Drew rebuilt his career, strengthened his relationships, and regained a sense of autonomy that Selena had tried to strip away. I continued my work, quietly observing, subtly guiding, and ensuring that the lessons learned from betrayal were never forgotten. In quiet moments, I reflected on the journey from fear and despair to strategy, patience, and ultimate triumph. The experience had been harrowing, but it had also been transformative. I had discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known existed, and I had helped Drew reclaim not just his assets, but his dignity and self-respect. And as I watched him navigate life with renewed confidence, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Betrayal had not defeated us. It had been a crucible, forging resilience, wisdom, and an unshakable bond. If you're watching this, I whispered into the quiet room. Subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. And remember, no matter how deep the betrayal, you can rise, you can fight back, and you can reclaim your life. The story of Selena's treachery, Drew's near collapse, and our ultimate victory became a testament, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, intelligence, patience, and unwavering determination could turn betrayal into triumph. Even after Selena's arrest, the storm was far from over. Her network of allies, people who had benefited from her schemes, was still out there, watching, waiting, and calculating their next move. I had assumed that capturing her would be the end, but betrayal rarely exists in isolation. It spreads, infects, and lingers. And I had to be vigilant. Drew and I spent countless hours reviewing financial statements, emails, and personal contacts she had used to manipulate him. It became evident that she had planned her moves with meticulous precision. Each step, each lie, each subtle coercion had been calculated to isolate Drew, make him vulnerable, and give her control. I realized that understanding her patterns was essential, not just for recovering what she had stolen, but for preventing any future attempts. One afternoon, as I sifted through documents at the kitchen table, Drew came over, exhausted but resolute. "Ellie, do you ever sleep?" he asked with a tired smile, though there was worry behind his eyes. "Sleep is a luxury we can't afford just yet," I replied, stacking another pile of papers. "Every ally she has, every loophole she could exploit, we need to account for. One mistake could undo all of this." The legal team was assembling for the trial, and I had taken it upon myself to provide them with every scrap of evidence, every witness account, and every financial anomaly. I worked closely with the investigators, feeding them insights into her psychology, patterns, and the subtle manipulations that had gone unnoticed for so long. It was exhausting work, but necessary. Then came the first sign of retaliation. A threatening email, seemingly harmless at first glance, arrived in Drew's inbox. It was unsigned, vague, but the undertone was unmistakable. "You think this is over?" My stomach sank. Selena's influence had not yet vanished. She had left behind seeds of fear, and they were starting to sprout. I took Drew aside. "Ignore it for now," I said firmly. "But we don't dismiss threats. We document them, track them, and let the authorities handle them. Don't give them the power to manipulate your mind again." Despite my reassurances, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the flicker of doubt in his gaze. Betrayal leaves scars, invisible but persistent, and undoing them takes time. I placed my hand on his, grounding him. "We've survived worse, Drew. Together. That's the only way forward." Days turned into weeks. The trial began, and the courtroom became a battleground where truth clashed with deception. Selena was defiant, attempting to manipulate the narrative. But every attempt crumbled under the weight of the evidence we had meticulously gathered. I watched from the gallery, a mixture of apprehension and resolve tightening my chest. Her accomplices began to emerge. Individuals who had enabled her schemes, from financial advisors to friends who had turned a blind eye. Each revelation was a dagger, painful but necessary. Drew and I bore witness to their downfall with a grim sense of satisfaction. The world was finally seeing her for who she truly was. A manipulator whose charm had concealed a calculated malice. Outside the courtroom, life demanded balance. I encouraged Drew to reconnect with old friends, to rebuild the network of support she had tried to dismantle. Slowly, I saw him reclaiming pieces of himself, the confidence, the independence, the joy he had buried under months of manipulation. One evening, as we reviewed the day's proceedings, I noticed Drew's eyes lingering on a photo of us taken before the chaos began. Simpler times. I forgot what it felt like to trust my own judgment, he admitted quietly. That's what she took from you, I said gently, but it's yours again. Trust is rebuilt. Drew, one decision at a time. One step at a time. The final days of the trial were intense. Witness after witness testified, each account reinforcing the narrative of deception, control, and greed. Every financial document we submitted chipped away at the fortress she had built around her lies. The jury listened intently, and I could feel the tide turning in our favor. Then came the moment of ultimate exposure. The forensic accountant presented a comprehensive report detailing the full extent of her embezzlement, manipulation, and attempts to frame Drew for crimes he didn't commit. The courtroom fell silent, and I felt a shiver of triumph run through me. Justice, at last, was catching up to her. After the verdict, we stepped outside into the cold evening air. Drew breathed deeply, as if the weight of months of fear had finally lifted. "It's over," he said, almost in disbelief. "It's not just over," I corrected gently. "It's a new beginning. You've learned, you've grown, and you've reclaimed yourself. That's what matters." In the following weeks, we focused on rebuilding. Financial accounts were restored, relationships repaired, and Drew's confidence solidified. I continued to mentor him, ensuring that the lessons of betrayal remained clear. Vigilance, trust in one's instincts, and the understanding that intelligence and patience can dismantle even the most intricate manipulations through it all. I reflected on my own journey. The months of fear, strategy, and meticulous planning had transformed me. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. And I had learned that courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and deliberate. "If you're watching this," I said quietly to the camera one evening as I recounted these moments, "remember that betrayal is painful, but it doesn't have to define you. Trust your instincts, fight wisely, and never lose hope. And subscribe so we can share these lessons together. Tell me where you're watching from." By the time Drew had fully reclaimed his life, Selena was serving her sentence, stripped of the power she had wielded so effortlessly. Her allies were exposed, and the webs of manipulation she had spun unraveled completely. We had not just survived, we had turned betrayal into a blueprint for resilience and triumph. As I looked back on the long months of struggle, strategy, and ultimate victory, I realized that betrayal had been a teacher. Harsh, unforgiving, and unrelenting, yes, but a teacher nonetheless. And in that knowledge, Drew and I found not just justice, but empowerment, strength, and the capacity to move forward with courage and clarity. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished courtroom floor. Today was the day that would finally decide everything. I could feel the tension in the air as Drew and I entered, flanked by our legal team. Every step echoed in my chest, a rhythmic reminder of the months of preparation, fear, and determination that had led us here. Selena sat at the defense table, her poise unnervingly composed. I could see the faintest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as they scanned the room, the first crack in her meticulously constructed akata. The jury filed in, and the judge took her seat. Silence settled like a thick blanket, but beneath it, I could sense the unspoken awareness. This trial was far more than legal procedure. It was the culmination of years of manipulation, secrecy, and betrayal. As the prosecutor began to speak, I felt Drew's hand brush against mine. His touch was reassuring, grounding me. "We're ready for this," he whispered, though I could feel the tremor in his voice. The remnants of the fear she had instilled. I squeezed his hand, letting him know silently that he wasn't facing this alone. The testimonies began, each one building on the last. Financial analysts described embezzlement patterns. Former colleagues recounted her manipulations, and witnesses exposed the subtle, cruel tactics she had used to isolate Drew. I watched Selena's expressions shift from feigned innocence to irritation, and then, as the evidence mounted, to panic. The walls she had built around herself, the confidence she wore like armor, were crumbling under the weight of truth. Then came my testimony. I recounted every detail of her schemes. From the whispered manipulations to the small, calculated gestures that had made Drew question himself. My voice shook at first, the memories raw and vivid, but as I continued, a fierce resolve took over. I would not be silenced. I would not allow her to rewrite the story. I saw Drew's eyes glisten with tears. But they were not tears of fear, they were tears of recognition, of relief, of reclaiming the part of himself she had tried to steal. As I spoke, I noticed the subtle reactions of the jury: nods, furrowed brows, leaning forward in their seats. They were absorbing the story, the manipulation, the betrayal, and most importantly, the calculated courage it had taken to survive and fight back. This was more than a trial. It was a story of resilience. It's a blueprint of strength in the face of deception. Outside the courtroom, tension still lingered. Selena's allies had attempted last-minute interventions, but each effort was met with careful countermeasures by our legal team. We had anticipated every move, leaving no room for surprise, no space for manipulation. It was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. But I knew that precision was the key to dismantling her control completely. After hours of testimony, cross-examination, and presentation of evidence, the jury retired to deliberate. The waiting was unbearable. Drew paced, his eyes distant, caught between hope and fear. I watched him, my heart aching for all the months of doubt and self-questioning he had endured. "It will be okay," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We've done everything we can. Now we wait, and we trust in what we know to be true." Hours passed. Each minute felt like an eternity, a slow grind of anticipation that gnawed at my patience. Finally, the jury returned. I could see the weight of the decision in their faces. The foreperson rose, holding the verdict slip. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on them, every breath held collectively. On the charges of manipulation, fraud, and embezzlement, the foreperson began. The jury finds the defendant guilty on all counts. Relief crashed over me like a tidal wave. I felt tears sting my eyes as Drew turned to me, the first genuine smile in months spreading across his face. He embraced me tightly, whispering, "We did it. We finally did it." But victory was not just in the courtroom. It extended into our daily lives, into the reclaimed freedom and confidence that Drew now carried. We focused on repairing the damage she had done, financial stability restored, relationships mended, and the subtle psychological scars addressed with care and patience. I encouraged him to rebuild connections with friends and colleagues she had tried to sever, reinforcing the foundation of trust and support that had been eroded. In the weeks that followed, I watched Drew transform. He was no longer the man hesitant to trust his own judgment, the man ensnared by fear and manipulation. He was decisive, confident, and resilient. The months of betrayal had been a crucible, and he had emerged tempered and stronger. As for me, I reflected on the journey with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. I had discovered reservoirs of strength I hadn't known existed. I had learned that strategy, patience, and the courage to confront the truth could dismantle even the most intricate manipulations. And through it all, I had nurtured Drew's confidence, helping him reclaim the autonomy she had tried to steal. One evening, as we sat in our quiet living room, I looked at him and said, "Remember, Drew? The power of knowledge and patience is greater than the charm of manipulation. Never forget the lessons you've learned, not just about her, but about yourself." Drew nodded, a serene determination in his eyes. "I won't, Mom. I finally understand what strength really is. And it's more than surviving. It's thriving." I smiled, feeling the weight of months of anxiety and strategy lift. We had turned betrayal into empowerment, deception into clarity, and fear into courage. The story of Selena's manipulation would serve as a cautionary tale, but more importantly, as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. If you're watching this, I said directly into the camera, my voice steady. Remember that betrayal is painful, but it can be transformed. Trust yourself, fight wisely, and never lose hope. And subscribe to follow these stories. Tell me where you're watching from. The storm had passed, and in its wake, Drew and I had found not just justice, but a deeper understanding of strength, trust, and the enduring power of resilience. Life after betrayal could still be vibrant, meaningful, and full of possibility. And in that knowledge, we had reclaimed not just what was lost, but the future we deserved. The courtroom doors closed behind us, the echoes of the verdict still reverberating in my chest. Relief mingled with exhaustion, but there was no time to linger in comfort. Selena's influence, though officially defeated, had left subtle cracks in our lives, cracks that required attention, care, and vigilance. Drew walked beside me, shoulders squared, a newfound steadiness in his step. For months, he had doubted himself, questioning every decision, every impulse. Now he moved with clarity, a quiet strength that only hardship can forge. I felt pride swell in me, tempered by the awareness that resilience is cultivated, not granted. We returned home, the house quiet but alive with the anticipation of renewal. Each room seemed to hold echoes of the manipulation Selena had sown, whispered doubts, subtle pressures, moments of guilt planted carefully to keep Drew obedient. I moved through the spaces deliberately, reclaiming each corner, each surface, turning them from symbols of fear into markers of recovery. Drew unpacked a small box of belongings he had left untouched for months. Mementos of a life interrupted. I watched him handle each object gently, a mixture of nostalgia and reclamation in his eyes. I never realized how much of myself I'd lost, he admitted softly, and how much I needed to be reminded I could take it back. We started with the small victories, reconnecting with friends she had tried to isolate us from, revisiting neglected projects, and reinstating routines that had once felt natural. Each step was deliberate, measured, and symbolic. Trust, both in others and in oneself, needed rebuilding. And I guided Drew through it like a careful gardener tending fragile shoots. But not all consequences were visible. Selena's manipulations had left psychological shadows, subtle doubts that whispered when least expected. Drew struggled with moments of insecurity, questioning whether he was truly capable of making independent decisions. I reminded him gently, firmly, that strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. We developed strategies to counter these lingering effects. Morning reflections became our ritual. Conversations about values and priorities, our daily practice. We documented goals, revisited past experiences to extract lessons, and celebrated incremental successes. It was painstaking work, but necessary. Recovery from betrayal is not a single act. It is a process that unfolds in careful, intentional steps. Then came the opportunity to rebuild more than just our personal lives, to secure Drew's professional standing, to restore what Selena had jeopardized. I helped him navigate business affairs, untangle manipulated contracts, and reassert control over projects she had attempted to divert. Each triumph, however small, was a reaffirmation of agency, a reclaiming of autonomy that had been threatened. One evening, as we reviewed a particularly tangled financial matter she had left in disarray, Drew leaned back and exhaled deeply. I feel like I'm finally seeing clearly again, he said. It's like the fog has lifted, and I can recognize what's real, what's mine. I smiled, the satisfaction of months of careful planning and emotional support blooming quietly in me. That clarity is yours to keep, I replied. But remember, it was always there. You just needed the courage to reclaim it. Life gradually shifted from reactive to proactive. Drew initiated projects he had shelved during her interference, reconnecting with colleagues and friends who had been wary of the disruption she caused. Social circles, once tense and divided, began to stabilize, bringing laughter and camaraderie back into spaces that had felt cold and uncertain. Meanwhile, I focused on my own renewal. Years of caregiving, strategizing, and emotional labor had taken their toll. I returned to passions I had set aside: writing, mentoring younger women, engaging in community projects that affirmed purpose and connection. In doing so, I reclaimed my own sense of identity beyond the role of protector and strategist. Yet, vigilance remained essential. Selena's ambition and cunning could have left open doors for future disruption. We implemented protective measures, strengthened legal safeguards, reorganized financial oversight, and ensured that no single individual could again wield disproportionate influence. Drew embraced these protocols not as restriction, but as empowerment, proof that knowledge and foresight are allies in freedom. Months passed. The seasons changed, each transition a reminder of the life cycles we endure. Drew grew into a version of himself that was unshaken by external manipulation, grounded in self-respect and clarity. I watched him, sometimes with awe, sometimes with quiet relief, marveling at the resilience born from adversity. And then came the day we could finally pause and reflect without immediate tension. Sitting on the porch, sipping tea as the sun set in a palette of golden amber, Drew reached for my hand. "Mom," he said, "I don't know if I could have done this without you. You taught me to fight, to see clearly, and to trust myself again." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sorrow, but from a profound sense of completion. "No," I said softly, "you did this. I only guided. Strength comes from within, Drew. You just had to remember it existed." In that quiet moment, the weight of months of betrayal, courtroom battles, and emotional labor lifted. We had survived, yes, but more importantly, we had thrived. The lessons were etched deep: courage, strategy, patience, and the refusal to allow manipulation to define our lives. Life after betrayal had its scars, but it also offered wisdom and opportunity. Drew and I moved forward with intention, aware of past pitfalls but unburdened by fear. The future was no longer a landscape of uncertainty, but a canvas of potential, painted with the colors of resilience, insight, and reclaimed agency. "If you're watching this," I said, turning toward the camera with a gentle smile, "remember that betrayal can leave wounds, but it can also teach you to reclaim your strength. Trust yourself, fight wisely, and never let fear dictate your life." Subscribe and share where you're watching from. Your story matters too. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow that reflected the calm certainty of victory earned through persistence and wisdom. Drew and I sat in silence, content in the knowledge that we had survived the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life we had fought so hard to reclaim.
The first morning of complete calm felt almost surreal. For months, Drew and I had navigated tension, manipulation, and uncertainty. Now, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, it highlighted the simple beauty of a life no longer dictated by fear or deceit. I inhaled deeply, letting the stillness settle into my bones. Dr. Drew moved around the kitchen, preparing coffee with a quiet efficiency that spoke volumes of his regained confidence. He paused, looking at me with a smile that had returned after so many months of guarded expressions. "Mom," he said, "I can't remember the last time I felt this. Free." I chuckled softly, sitting at the table, feeling the years of worry and strategy dissolve. "Freedom is something you claim for yourself," I replied. "No one can give it to you, and no one can take it away. Not for long." We spent the morning revisiting letters, photos, and reminders of our ordeal. I realized that each memento, each memory of betrayal, now carried a different weight, one of survival, strength, and learned wisdom. Drew had transformed from a man overshadowed by manipulation into someone who recognized his own agency, and I couldn't have been prouder. But our journey wasn't just about healing ourselves. It was about ensuring that others, particularly women of our generation, understood the power of vigilance, wisdom, and resilience. I began writing notes, stories, reflections, turning experiences into lessons. Each page became a message. Betrayal does not define you, but how you respond does. As weeks turned into months, Drew reestablished professional and personal relationships. Fortified by the lessons we had both learned, we connected with old friends who had doubted or feared interference, rebuilding trust step by step. The bonds that endured were now stronger, deeper, and unshakable. I also embraced my own passions, returning to volunteer work, mentoring younger women, and cultivating hobbies I had set aside during years of emotional labor. Each activity was a statement. Life continues, and it can be joyful, purposeful, and full of discovery, even after betrayal or loss. One afternoon, Drew approached me with an idea that filled my heart with pride. "Mom," he said, "we've survived, learned, and grown. What if we create something for others, a resource, a community, a voice for those who feel powerless like I once did?" I nodded, emotions swelling. "We can, and we will, because wisdom, courage, and resilience are gifts that multiply when shared." Our home became a center of renewal, a place where lessons turned into guidance and guidance into empowerment. We hosted gatherings, shared our experiences, and reached out to those struggling with manipulation, control, and betrayal. Every story we heard reaffirmed our mission. Survival is possible. And with strategy, courage, and love, life can be reclaimed. And then there was Drew. Watching him thrive, laugh freely, and assert his boundaries reminded me why every step, every plan, and every protective measure had been necessary. He was no longer a passive participant in his own life. He had become its author, writing chapters filled with purpose, insight, and independence. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Drew turned to me and said, "I finally understand what you meant about strength coming from within. And I see now that no one, not even someone as cunning as Selena, could have taken that from me if I had trusted myself." I smiled, feeling a rush of affirmation. "Exactly," I said. "And remember, strength isn't about perfection. It's about resilience, awareness, and the courage to act. That's the true victory over betrayal." The lessons were clear, the stakes understood. Life had tested us, pushed us to the brink, and revealed the depth of our courage. But it had also shown us that even in our darkest moments, the seeds of recovery, empowerment, and redemption exist, waiting for those willing to fight for them. As night fell, I spoke directly to those watching this story unfold. If you're watching this, remember, betrayal can shake your world, but it doesn't define your destiny. Trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and never be afraid to reclaim your life. Life after betrayal is possible, and it can be extraordinary. Subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, and share your own story. Your voice matters. I looked at Drew, at our home, at the life we had rebuilt from shards of deceit and doubt. Everything that had once felt like an ending had, in fact, become a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the full weight of that truth. We were survivors, strategists, and authors of our own lives. We had turned betrayal into strength, manipulation into clarity, and fear into courage. The path had been long and fraught with tension, but it led us to a place of power, wisdom, and profound hope. And in that, we discovered the ultimate redemption, the knowledge that we had not only survived, but thrived together as mother and son, stronger than ever.